The good news is that I do think I have a unique story to tell you this morning, and I think it's a success story, but I don't mean that necessarily from an entrepreneurial perspective, although that's part of it. It's much more on a personal level, as I think a lot of you in this room know. Looking back, my prep story started like a lot of you in this room in 7th and 8th grade. I grew up in Norwalk on the same street as my dad. He was in the class of 1951. He hitchhiked to prep every day, which is unbelievable. But he felt prep was good for me. I didn't want to go, but we made a deal that I would try it for a year, and thank God I did. After the first couple of months, I was entrenched, met a lot of great guys who 30 years later are still my best friends. People always ask me why I'm passionate about Fairfield Prep. They ask, what is it about the school that makes it so unique? Why are the guys so close? I'm sure everybody in this room has a theory on why, but my theory is that prep is a lot like a fraternity experience. But unlike a college fraternity, prep catches you in your formidable years. In other words, by the time you get to college, you've already experienced a lot. Your first beer, your first date. I know you're not supposed to have your first beer anymore, but at prep, I think really what cements the guys together is experience all those first things together, particularly at 14 to 18 years old versus 18 to 22. And you really grow up like brothers do, and that's pretty incredible. I think the other part that brings people together are the common goals that everyone is trying to achieve. Everyone there is trying to get into a good school, trying to excel at sports or whatever passion that they have. And everyone is really trying to be a better person. And, never forget attending the afternoon masses presided over by Father Brissett before we played football on Friday nights. Todd Tazzoli and Tom Linnell can attest to that. He had cue cards and inspirational sayings, and by the time we busted out of the locker room, we felt like God was on our side, and I think he was, particularly in the 70s and 80s. But from what I hear, God has been focused on lacrosse and hockey for the last few years. But it's good to see he's back on football in 2012. All that stuff was obviously very exciting, but like my dad, who left a corporate job to start his own small business, I had always dreamed of being an entrepreneur. And it was bigger, the reason was bigger than determining my own paycheck. It was really more so to set my life up the way I wanted. I could work close to home and not have to commute, go to soccer games and all that. And back in 1998, 2 of my prep classmates were thinking the same thing. One of these guys, Chad Jacobs, Don is here, who's like my second dad, was captain of the hockey team at prep our senior year, and my roommate had held lacrosse for 4 years. Chad ended up marrying my cousin Karen, and his kids and my kids are third cousins, so safe to say we had a great trust factor between us. The other guy was John Flanagan, another close friend from prep who was a lawyer who hated practicing law. Chad had a Wall Street background like me, and we both had seen public companies really hurt their reputations and jeopardize their ability to raise capital because they really didn't understand how to communicate with or present themselves to Wall Street or the media. Nor did they really understand how to handle crisis situations in a manner that reduced risk and preserved shareholder value. You see examples like that every day. This is kind of a bad one at breakfast, but somebody goes in, they find a thumb in their chili at Wendy's, right? And the company has got to respond immediately, and if they don't know the facts, they've got to articulate the process they're going through to get the facts. And it's literally a crisis playbook off the shelf. And as we all know, something like that can destroy sales and destroy a share price, and that's really kind of what we do. We manage that whole crisis situation. So because of these, that these issues affect shareholders first and foremost, public companies need an outside perspective on how to handle them, and Wall Street firms don't do it. And the consultants who traditionally did it didn't really know anything about the capital markets, and so it was a real mismatch. And Chad and I felt we could fill the niche in this PR world, and with John as our third founding partner and our attorney, we set up ICR in 1998. And fast forward 14 years later, we have about 120 employees, 5 offices around the United States and China, and our revenues are approaching about $40 million, driven off a client base of almost 400 public companies. They include the Gap and Abercrombie & Fitch and Royal Dutch Shell. Pandora, Radio, Lazard, like Mason, companies like that. But in the beginning, ICR was just 3 people, and we did everything from take out the garbage to the accounting to cleaning the bathrooms, all that kind of stuff. It's fun to tell the story of how we started, and invariably I get asked what the most critical decisions were in starting the company, or how did you do it. And I always say the 3 biggest pieces of advice are the following. First, make sure you have a competitive advantage in what you do. In our case, like I mentioned, it was introducing kind of Wall Street talent to an industry that always relied on more of a PR perspective. If we didn't bring something unique to the table, I'm not sure we could have broken through and succeeded against the bigger guys. The second piece of advice is to get a lawyer for a partner, or simply just get a good lawyer. I think, you know, a lawyer can get things right from the very beginning on day one, how the business is capitalized, an operating agreement that governs your business and how things are handled, your contracts, etc. The other good part, I think, about a lawyer like John is really the analytical thinking, looking at problems and trying to solve them in a methodical way. Like Chad and I were more like ready, fire, aim, more sales guys, and John was terrific at grounding that. The third piece of the puzzle in my mind is hiring people that share your values. Looking back over 14 years, I would say the biggest hiring mistakes we ever made is when we sacrificed values for brilliance. And what I've learned is hiring brilliant jerks, which you see all the time in every company, can really ruin a culture, giant money and time drain, and ultimately it's never worth it. And so, as you might guess, Chad and John and my version of values are prep values. So we hired Mike Fox to run our communication division, class of 1986. Don Duffy became our president, father of Dean, 2010, I think, Dylan, 13, and Dale, who's a freshman. We hired Ed Rowe's daughter-in-law briefly. That was a huge mistake, no, I'm kidding. And we needed a loan. We called Rich Manning, another prep graduate. Bob Baptist, in my class, does all our 401k stuff. One of our lead attorneys is John Flanagan, class of 1980, and John Phelan, who's here, does all our insurance, and I'll get to him later. But you know, having that team around me, we all can sleep at night because we know and we trust the people around us. The question of values at ICR was never more important, though. In 2008 through the end of 2010. Period really defined our company and tested our faith individually. In mid-November of 2008, I was taking the train from Grand Central back with John Flanagan, who told me his stomach had been bothering him. I didn't really think anything of it. You know, we're just talking about clients and business and family and stuff, and having a couple of beers on the ride home, on the train ride home. And John looked great. Unfortunately, he was diagnosed with colon cancer the next week, Thanksgiving week, and he died 30 days later. Christmas Eve. I had always thought that your worst case scenario was having a doctor say, you have 6 months, but John unfairly didn't even get that. No time to say goodbye to his kids, 7, 5, and 2, and really no time to do anything, so our heads were obviously spinning, and Fairfield Prep was a huge support during that time. At John's funeral, Chad and I gave the eulogy. I noticed that Chad looked thinner than normal. He had been in Honduras at a client manufacturing facility the month before, so we thought he had a parasite or something like that. But just 6 weeks after John passed away, Chad was diagnosed with stomach cancer. And he passed away 18 months later in June of 2010. And if the whole story weren't unbelievable enough, our president, Don Duffy, and his wife, Dana, received a summer diagnosis in 2010 that Dana had lung cancer, and she passed away just a few months later in December, leaving Don with a senior and sophomore in prep and 2 younger boys. So really 3 key members of our, what I would call the ICR family in less than 24 months, which was obviously devastating. But the entire company pulled together in a way that I thought was very unique, in line with the values that I mentioned earlier. I've come to learn that prep values permeate our corporate culture, and that's really how we made it. People really surprised me during that period. You know, again, prep had masses for us, and that was really great. We worked with a client, McCormick and Schmidt. It's like a high-end seafood chain of restaurants. The CEO flew from Seattle. He named the New York banquet room after John. They had a big thing, invited the whole family, which was great. Michael Ruzioni, captain of the 1980 hockey team, sought out Chad, sent him a huge picture autographed by everybody on the team of the 1980 Olympics, and said if he saw it on eBay, he would come down there and strangle Chad in person. But it was really a great support. But I think, like, from a business sense, we had to focus on protecting that at all costs because it was our livelihood. So we tried to stay focused, started cutting costs without sacrificing any expense that would compromise the client experience. We hired a CFO to really analyze the health of the business and the metrics. And while we tried to mitigate the damage from the recession and the credit crunch, we also had to throw our support behind Chad's family, Karen, John's family, Amanda, and Don's as well, as best we could. We started a foundation for both Chad and John so their wives and kids could have the chance to keep them alive in their hearts. We assembled a board of directors, and pleased to say that we've raised over $700,000 to date between the two foundations, so they're doing all kinds of great stuff locally. We established a prep scholarship, which we fund every year in the name of Chad and John, and we'll do so for as long as I'm involved with ICR. And finally, and I think most impactful, we made the margarita the official drink of our company as an homage. So the reason I kind of mention all this is definitely not for attention or credit to me or ICR. In fact, this is the first time I've ever really told this story. Many of you have probably heard bits and pieces of it, but I decided to tell it because Chad and John and I, with a lot of help from prep alums and friends and help along the way, we created a little company that's not so little anymore. And so in a sense, it's an entrepreneurial success story, but it's more of a life success story. One that's has its roots in prep values. It highlights, I think, how people with similar vision and backgrounds and a lot of teamwork can overcome anything. And I'm happy to report that, much like busting out of the locker room after a Father Brissett mass or a Earl Lavery speech, since the depths of despair kind of in 2009, our business is up about 70%. And in 2010, we became the largest financial communications firm in North America, which was really a goal of all of ours. So I don't really have any remarks beyond that, but I know those guys are kind of with us every day and kind of what we do. And it's kind of a neat story, so that's really my speech. Thank you very much.